Okay, so today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the actual process of painting your watercolor drawings. So, we talked about, in the previous video, our 1/2 inch grid on our photograph. And then drawing that 1.5 inch grid, because we're enlarging it by 3 times, onto our tracing paper, and then drawing our animal out. We also talked about practicing some of the doodles we might do within our animal. Okay. After you have drawn your animal on your tracing paper and you have used your transfer paper to transfer it to your watercolor paper, you're going to have the pencil outline. Then you're going to use Sharpie and various other permanent markers to go over your lines. And I want you again to pay attention to line weight. We have the fine point Sharpies, which will give you a thicker line. We have the extra fine, which give you a slightly thinner. And we have the ultra fine, which give you an even thinner line. I also have these micron markers, which can give you super duper thin lines. So I use those in areas like this where I really wanted my lines to be thin. I also doubled up in some areas, so using this, and I went over a couple times to give it some more variation. We talked about if you have fur or anything like that, where you could create sort of designs or textures that way. You don't have to use just straight lines, okay? So once you're done with the Sharpie, you want to go over your drawing and make sure any extraneous pencil marks or graphite marks left over from your transfer paper are gone, because watercolor paint is transparent and that graphite will show through, and I'm sure you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure your drawing is nice and clean with no extra graphite lines, pencil marks, smudgies, nothing like that. Okay? Okay. Okay, and once that's all finished and you're all cleaned up, you're ready to start painting. However, you're not ready to start painting until you do some experimentations. Okay, so I'm going to put this aside for right now. Okay, and on this large piece of paper, which I will leave in the classroom for you guys to see, are some examples of what some of the techniques look like. Okay, we're using liquid watercolor this time, so they're going to come in these handy dandy little containers. One of these containers per table, okay? All the colors are labeled. If you start to run out, you let me know and I'll refill it for you. So, a couple of the techniques we need to talk about. Wet and wet, wet on dry, saran wrap. That's saran wrap. This is saran wrap. Salt, salt, salt. Okay? And these all look different, okay? Because the watercolor will react differently depending on how much pigment versus water, how long you let it dry for before you apply the salt. So you're going to have to experiment with the small sheets of paper, okay? Another thing we're going to use is acrylic medium or gloss varnish, okay? Basically this is clear acrylic paint. So when it dries like a plastic and it's waterproof. So these are 2 examples that I created last year where I used the gloss medium to draw my outlines, let it dry completely, and then I went in with the watercolor, and then you can see my lines remain white. It acts as a resist. It's similar to using the masking fluid, which some of you used. Okay, so that's what that will look like. So you could do a light coat of a color, let it dry, go over certain areas with the gloss medium, let that dry completely, and then go back over it, and you'll get some really cool transparency effects. Okay, so that's what I did here. The area I chose to do it wasn't that, oh, this is a better example. So the underneath was blue. I drew my little swirly with the acrylic medium, let that dry, and then went over that with green. So you could see the blue line through the green. So it's an excellent way to do the doodles as part of your designs, okay? So I'm gonna get this out of the way for now. So when you're ready to start painting, all of you are going to get a palette, which will be yours for the remainder of the year, okay? Before you do anything, grab a piece of masking tape and write your name on it. Okay, you are responsible for this for the entire year. So you're responsible for cleaning it out, for storing it properly, and for making sure I get it back at the end of the year. Okay? So this is what we're going to work out of when we start painting. The first thing you want to do is grab some of these small scraps of paper and try some different things out with them. So at your table, you would need the following items. Okay, I'm going to leave my lid underneath here. So the watercolor paint, the watercolor palette, little pieces of watercolor paper. You're going to need a bucket of water. One side should stay clean, the other side can get dirty for rinsing out your brush. If it starts to get muddy, rinse it out and get fresh water. You will also need about a 2 or so foot length of paper towel, which you should fold up about 3 or 4 times so that you have a nice little pad to dry your brush off. Okay? Then I want to make sure that I have any of the materials that I plan on using. Saran wrap, the acrylic gloss medium, salt. I have 2 different types of salt, table salt and sea salt. So those are going to give you 2 different effects. Okay, so get everything that you need. Obviously other people need to use this stuff as well, so you know we have to work around that. All right, so the first thing that I am going to do, you can also get a spray bottle. That can do some cool things to your watercolors as well. So once you have all the materials set up, paper towel, brushes, I have a variety of sizes and shapes. I have 2 square, 2 round, my bucket of water, my watercolor paint, plastic wrap salt, etc. So I'm going to take a piece of watercolor paper. I'm going to do the salt technique first. First thing I'm going to do is write my name and write the technique that I'm going to try. Okay, so I'm going to use sea salt for this one. So I'm going to make sure that this is open and ready to go. And I'm going to do some warm colors. So I'm going to open these up and I'm going to take my small round brush. I'm going to rinse it out just to make sure it's clean. I'm going to dry it off on my paper towel, and I'm going to pick up some yellow paint, and I'm just going to drop a little bit of that yellow paint into my palette. Now with the liquid watercolor, a little goes a long way. This is going to be my rinsing side. Okay, so I'm going to rinse and dry off my brush. Now I can pick up a little bit of that orange. Okay, just a few little drops. You don't need a puddle. Okay, rinse off my brush, dry it off, and pick up some of that red. So you're working from your palettes. You are not working from here. Okay, do not pull color directly from there, because if you go in there accidentally with a dirty brush, you contaminate all of that paint for somebody else, and that's not cool. All right, so I'm going to do some salt here. One technique, especially if you're doing a large area, is you can actually squirt your paper with a fine mist of water to sort of dampen it. And I'm going to pick up my orange. And I'll get some yellow in there as well. And I'm just experimenting, I'm just playing here. Okay, and you might want to add water to your colors before you apply them. so that they're not super concentrated. Remember, it's always easier to start lighter and go darker later, right? Add some more yellow. Maybe I'll add like drops of yellow in there. I can even pick up some water and sort of splash it on. Okay, and while that is still wet, I am going to pick up just a teeny tiny pinch of salt. And a little goes a long way with the salt. You don't want to coat the whole thing in salt because then you're not going to see the effect. And it's just going to get caked on and sit there. And you can see here, already it's starting to work. We're sort of sucking up the water and doing its thing there. So that's my salt technique. So now I can grab another piece of paper, write my name on it, and I could do saran wrap next. Okay, so here I might decide to pick up some clean water with my big brush, and I'm just going to pick up that orange and that wet and wet technique. You see how quickly and easily that blends because my paper was already wet. And everything's wet, so it's all blending quite lovely. Quite nice. Now on here, I applied some masking fluid. I also did a little design with my acrylic medium. I did that earlier today, so it's completely dry. So again, what I can do is I will clean out my brush. I could pick up some water, and I'll pick up my color that I want. Okay. And it's pretty light, so maybe I'll pick up some of this red again. Oh, looks like part of it got smudged. But as the paint dries, it's going to sort of settle off those areas where the acrylic medium is. So that got smudged, so that's why it's sort of a blob of white. But you can see that wherever the acrylic medium was, it's going to remain white. And these are in little applicator tips, like they're like needle point. So I'm actually just going to put it over here so you can actually see it. Okay, so that's what it looks like when it comes out. You can actually also use a brush to apply this if you want to. When you're done with these, make sure you put the lids back on, otherwise they will dry, and that's not fun for people. And actually, while this is still a little bit wet, I'm going to pick up some of my table salt. Sprinkle some on. Okay, so you can do a variety of techniques. You can do salt and saran wrap. You can do salt and spray it down with water. Whatever you want to do. Okay? But I want you to practice first on these. Make sure you get the look you want, the colors to look the way you want them to look, and also figure out the techniques because it does require practice. It doesn't always work the first time. Okay? So I would put these in the drying rack, let them dry, and you can even see how as it's drying, the white is really showing through quite nicely. And then here's my, I did some water splatters and some salt. You can see the salt working in these areas. Okay, so that is what that looks like. So when you're ready to start painting, you will make sure again you have all of these supplies available to you. All right, you want to have them in easy reach so that you're not running around and things are drying when you don't want them to be drying. All right, so again, paper towel, water basin, dirty and clean side, variety of brushes, and your colors. Okay, so before I get my painting over here, I'm going to pick up some more color. So now I'm ready to start. You want to start with lighter layers. You can always build up darker values as you work. And you want to start probably in the background. Now, depending on what you want to do as far as colors go, you have to have a plan for that. So my plan is to do these cool colors in my background. I'm going to use some salt, and maybe I'll play around with some water splatters. And I'm going to use some warmer colors for inside the giraffe. And I might let some of my blue colors maybe bleed in or be part of my giraffe. I'm going to see how it goes. So I'm just going to paint. And you guys can kind of see how that goes. So I'm going to add a little bit of water, a few little clean water droplets to these paints, just to dilute them a little bit because I don't need them at full strength. Okay. And I'm going to take my water bottle and just lightly mist the background. Okay, and then I'm going to start painting. Okay, so now that I'm done, I actually did the blues and the purples, let that area dry, and then went in with the yellows and the oranges. So it's time lapse, so you didn't really see how long it took, you know, for the drying process. But you should start with your background, let that dry overnight, and then you can start working on the inside of your animal. Once this area is dry, I'm going to go in with my acrylic gloss varnish and do my doodle design that I want to do inside my giraffe. Let that dry completely, and then go over it again with a variation of oranges and yellows and other warm colors. Okay? So again, it's a layering process. And then I may go back in with more reds and actually use a fine point brush and paint on some additional doodles so that there's a lot of depth in my animal. Okay? Make sure your name is somewhere on your painting. You can just do it in the border, the lower right hand corner. That would be great. When you're done with your paint, cover it. Even if this paint dries out, you can still reuse it tomorrow by just adding a little bit of water. So you're going to have bins on the side of the classroom for 4th and 8th period where you will store these. First period are upstairs by the shelf where your sketchbooks are. So you'll have these paints. So if you mix up a specific color that you really like, you can save it, and then you'll have it again for tomorrow. Okay, so this will go away into the bin. This will go in the drying rack. All your other supplies will get put away as well. Very important that we clean out our brushes. So take the bin,